Don't touch him. Emily Parker threw her curvy frame between four armed men, and the massive black Cane Corso pressed against her legs. One man reached forward. The dog snarled. Then another man entered, and everyone stepped aside. Dante Valente, exceptionally handsome, billionaire, one of America's most feared mafia bosses. Emily didn't know that yet. "Move," Dante ordered. No. Nobody refused Dante Valente. Then he gave the command his protection dog had obeyed thousands of times. "Brutus, come." Brutus looked directly at him. Then deliberately sat on Emily's foot. Silence. Dante stared at the only creature in his empire that had never disobeyed him. Then at the woman his dog had apparently chosen instead. "What did you do to my dog?" "Don't touch him." Emily Parker kept herself planted between the armed men and the enormous Cane Corso pressed against her legs. Now that she knew the man standing across from her was Dante Valente, every survival instinct she possessed suggested that refusing him had been a spectacularly bad decision. She knew the name. Everyone did. Dante Valente controlled an organization whose influence stretched across major East Coast cities, alongside a legitimate empire of shipping companies, luxury hotels, real estate, construction, security, and investments worth billions. And apparently, he also owned the dog sitting on her foot. "Brutus," Dante repeated. His voice remained calm. That somehow made him more intimidating. "Come." Brutus watched him carefully. He didn't move. One of Dante's men shifted in disbelief. Dante's expression barely changed, but Emily caught the slight tightening of his jaw. This wasn't normal. She looked down at Brutus. The dog's body was still tense, but not in the way she had first assumed. He wasn't cowering from Dante. His ears weren't pinned in terror. When Dante stepped closer, Brutus didn't retreat. In fact, his attention stayed completely fixed on him. Emily understood. "He's not afraid of you." Dante's eyes moved to her. "I know." Then stop commanding him. The silence behind Dante became almost comical. Four armed men stared at Emily as if she had just volunteered to test gravity from a rooftop. Dante looked less amused. "You are telling me how to handle my dog. I'm telling you what your dog is telling me." "He isn't telling you anything." Brutus leaned harder against her leg. Emily glanced down. "He's making a surprisingly persuasive argument." For one dangerous second, nobody spoke. Then Emily crouched slowly. She didn't grab Brutus's collar. She simply rested one hand near his shoulder and watched his breathing. "This isn't disobedience," she said. "He's overloaded." Dante's gaze sharpened. Brutus had escaped during a brief security transfer nearby. Men had immediately pursued him, doing exactly what trained security personnel were supposed to do. But to an already overstimulated animal, Emily explained, more commands and more people closing in could create more pressure. He needs a minute where nobody expects anything from him. Dante looked at his dog. For perhaps the first time, Emily saw something beneath his controlled expression. Concern. He has the best trainers in the country. I believe you. He's never ignored a command. That doesn't mean he can't have a bad day. Dante clearly disliked how simple she made it sound. Emily looked toward the armed men. Could they step back? Nobody moved. She realized her mistake. They weren't waiting for her. They were waiting for him. Dante gave the smallest nod. All four men immediately retreated. The contrast was almost absurd. Four dangerous-looking men obeyed Dante without hesitation. His dog remained firmly seated on Emily's foot. She nearly smiled. Don't. Emily looked up innocently. I didn't say anything. You were about to. I was thinking very loudly. Something flickered in Dante's expression. Not quite a smile, but close. The shop grew quieter. Emily let Brutus decide what happened next. Gradually, his breathing slowed. The tension in his massive body eased. Then Dante crouched several feet away. No command this time. He simply waited. Brutus lifted his head. His tail moved once against the floor. Then he stood. He looked at Emily, looked at Dante, and finally walked toward the man who had apparently never imagined needing to ask permission from anyone, least of all his own dog. Dante rested one hand against Brutus's neck. The dog leaned into him immediately. There was no fear there, only loyalty and exhaustion. Emily saw Dante recognize the difference. For the first time in years, Dante Valente had encountered a problem that money, power, discipline, and commands couldn't immediately solve. And somehow, solving it had required him to listen to a woman he'd met less than 10 minutes ago. He looked at Emily across Brutus's broad back. Neither of them knew it yet, but Brutus had just given Dante a reason to come back. By the time Dante left Happy Tales that afternoon, Brutus was walking beside him, as if nothing unusual had happened. Emily assumed that was the end of it. She was wrong. The next morning, Dante Valente walked back through her door with Brutus at his side. Emily stared at them. Brutus stared back. Dante looked as immaculate and intimidating as before, which made the reason for his visit considerably more ridiculous. He won't eat. Emily looked at Brutus. The Cane Corso appeared perfectly healthy. Alert eyes, relaxed posture, considerable interest in the treat jar behind her counter. He won't eat anything? Breakfast. What did you give him? The same food he's eaten for 3 years. Emily reached into the jar and held out a small treat. Brutus took it immediately. Dante stared at him. Brutus chewed. Emily offered another. He ate that too. The silence became increasingly personal. Emily folded her arms. I believe I've completed my diagnosis. Dante's eyes narrowed. She remembered that she was not, technically, qualified to diagnose anything. Behavioral diagnosis, she corrected. Your dog is manipulating you. Brutus does not manipulate. Brutus sat beside Emily and looked hopefully at the treat jar. Of course not. Dante left with considerably less dignity than he'd arrived with. 2 days later, he returned. Brutus seemed restless. Emily watched the dog spend 10 peaceful minutes investigating every interesting smell in the shop before settling behind her counter. There appeared to be no emergency. 3 days after that, Dante came back because Brutus had begun pulling toward the same street during walks. The pattern continued. Never frequently enough to seem absurd at first. Never with a problem serious enough to require Noah Bennett's veterinary clinic. Just small things. A meal Brutus suddenly seemed less interested in. Restlessness at home. An unusual enthusiasm for a particular walking route. Emily eventually stopped treating Dante's appearances like appointments. Brutus would enter, inspect the shop, accept an appropriate amount of attention, and settle somewhere nearby with the unmistakable satisfaction of someone arriving at his favorite place. Dante, meanwhile, always had an explanation. Emily became less convinced by each one. On his 5th visit, Brutus was stretched behind the counter while Emily worked, completely relaxed. Dante stood nearby watching him. Emily glanced over. Congratulations. For what? Your dog has friends. Dante looked genuinely skeptical. He has handlers. That's not the same thing. He has trainers. Still not friends. He has me. Emily paused. Something in Dante's tone made her look at him differently. There had been no arrogance in those 3 words, only certainty, and beneath it, perhaps, the smallest trace of confusion. She softened. Yes, he has you. Brutus lifted his head at Dante's voice. His entire attention changed immediately. Emily had seen enough animals to recognize attachment when she saw it. Brutus loved Dante. That had never been the problem. But he can have you and still enjoy other people. Dante considered this as though she had proposed a radical restructuring of his organization. Emily smiled. He's allowed to have a social life. He's a protection dog. Those aren't mutually exclusive. Brutus rolled onto one hip. Emily pointed at him. Look at that. I'm looking. He's relaxing. He relaxes at home. Does he? Dante didn't answer immediately. That hesitation interested her. Over the following visits, Emily began noticing something else. The terrifying reputation surrounding Dante Valente remained entirely justified. People recognized him. Conversations sometimes stopped when he entered. His men watched doors and windows with quiet precision. His phone could ring once and change the atmosphere around him instantly. Dante never raised his voice. He didn't need to. His power was most obvious in how quickly everyone responded when he spoke. Everyone except Brutus, apparently. Around Emily, that contrast became increasingly absurd. One afternoon, Dante was discussing something quietly on his phone, while Brutus lay behind the counter, with a stolen plush duck between his paws. Emily noticed the toy. Then Dante noticed it. Brutus. The dog froze. Dante held out his hand. Give it. Brutus looked at him, then slowly lowered his enormous head over the duck. Emily bit the inside of her cheek. Dante looked at her. Don't. I'm thinking quietly this time. You are visibly enjoying this. A little. Dante returned his attention to the dog, who had once obeyed him with military precision. Emily watched the scene with growing amusement. At first, Dante Valente had returned because something genuinely seemed different about Brutus. But as the days passed, another question quietly began forming. How long would it take before the dog stopped being the real reason he kept walking through her door? The change in Brutus was subtle at first. Emily noticed it because she knew what to look for. When Brutus first entered Happy Tales, even while resting, some part of him had remained on duty. His ears tracked every sound. His eyes followed every person. If Dante moved, Brutus noticed. If a door opened, his body became alert, before his mind seemed to decide whether the sound mattered. He knew how to lie down. He didn't seem to know how to switch off. One afternoon, Emily watched him abandon his usual position near Dante and sprawl across the floor with a battered rope toy. How many hours a day does he work? Dante looked up. Work? Protection, training, security routines. He's always with me. That's not what I asked. Dante's expression suggested that distinction was inconvenient. He explained that Brutus had exceptional trainers, carefully managed exercise, premium food, regular veterinary care, acres of private grounds, and facilities better equipped than some professional kennels. Emily listened. I'm sure he has everything money can buy. He does. That's care. Dante waited. It's not necessarily companionship. His expression cooled slightly. Emily didn't retreat. Brutus spends his life watching you, protecting you, waiting for the next instruction. Even when nothing is happening, he's waiting for something to happen. That's what he was trained to do. I know. She nodded toward Brutus. But when does he get to be bad at something? Dante frowned. What? When does he get to chase something pointless, meet a dog he doesn't know, spend 20 minutes smelling the same patch of grass for reasons nobody understands? That sounds inefficient. Emily laughed. I'm beginning to understand the problem. Dante gave her a look, but something changed after that conversation. Not dramatically. Dante Valente did not suddenly become a man who threw tennis balls across public parks while discussing his feelings. He simply began making small adjustments. Brutus received more unstructured walks, less constant correction, short periods where nobody asked him to perform anything. Emily introduced controlled social interaction with calm dogs she trusted. At first, Dante watched every second. Then he learned not to interfere. Brutus changed. His posture softened. He slept more deeply at Happy Tales. He began bringing toys to Emily, instead of merely accepting whatever she offered. Once, Dante arrived to find his terrifying protection dog asleep on his back, legs partially in the air. He stopped in the doorway. Emily looked over. "Careful." Dante's eyes narrowed. "Why?" "Your reputation may not survive this." Brutus snored. Dante stared at him. Then, very quietly, he smiled. Emily saw it. She pretended she hadn't. What surprised her more was how often Dante began staying after there was no longer any reason to. At first, he had remained while Brutus adjusted. Then while Brutus played. Then while Brutus slept. Dante would stand near the counter answering messages, occasionally talking to Emily between calls. The conversations began with dogs. Then business. Then nothing important at all. Emily learned that Dante drank coffee without sugar, disliked people who were late, and possessed an unexpectedly dry sense of humor that appeared only when he forgot to guard it. Dante learned which customers Emily worried about, why she kept extra towels for rescue volunteers, and that she hummed when concentrating. Neither acknowledged how much they were learning. Then Emily noticed the irony. One afternoon, Brutus was asleep behind the counter. Dante was not. He stood with his back positioned, where he could see both the entrance and the reflection in the front window. His phone rested in one hand. His eyes moved automatically whenever someone passed outside. Even during silence, some part of him remained alert, always watching, always anticipating, always working. Emily looked from Dante to Brutus, then back again. Dante noticed. What? Nothing. That wasn't nothing. She considered explaining. Instead, she picked up a tennis ball and tossed it lightly toward him. Dante caught it automatically. He stared at the ball. Then at her. Throw it. For Brutus? No, Dante. I'm trying to socialize you. He almost looked offended. Almost. Brutus woke, saw the ball, and immediately stood. Dante looked at him. Then, with the solemn expression of a man making a major strategic concession, he threw it. Brutus bounded after it. Emily laughed, and for several minutes, Dante's phone remained untouched on the counter. Emily didn't tell him what she had realized. She didn't need to. Brutus had spent years surrounded by luxury, protection, structure, and purpose, without ever learning how to simply exist. Dante had given his dog everything he understood how to give. Perhaps that was why he had never noticed what was missing, because Dante Valente had built his own life exactly the same way. And lately, even after Brutus fell asleep, Dante kept finding reasons not to leave. Noah Bennett entered Happy Tales carrying a medical bag. Brutus liked him immediately. Dante did not. Noah owned the veterinary clinic nearby and had known Emily for years. He occasionally stopped in when she wanted a professional opinion about an animal that needed actual medical attention. That afternoon, he came to check a rescue spaniel Emily had been helping. Brutus noticed him before anyone could make introductions. The Cane Corso approached, sniffed Noah's hand, accepted a scratch beneath the chin, then leaned comfortably against his leg. Dante watched the entire betrayal in silence. Emily noticed. Something wrong? No. Noah smiled at Brutus. Friendly guy. He is selective, Dante said. Emily looked at him. Apparently not selective enough. She hid her smile. Noah finished checking the spaniel, gave Emily his recommendations, then placed a paper bag on the counter. I brought your lunch. Emily brightened. You remembered. You forget to eat when you're busy. I don't forget. You had crackers for lunch yesterday. Crackers are food. They're evidence that food existed nearby. Dante's attention shifted slowly between them. Noah clearly knew Emily's habits. Emily clearly liked having him around. Worse, Brutus was now sitting beside Noah as if considering a change in ownership. After Noah left, Dante remained unusually quiet. Emily lasted almost 30 seconds. You can ask. Ask what? Whatever you've been trying not to ask. Dante adjusted one cuff. How long have you known Bennett? There it was. About 6 years. That's a long time. For knowing someone? Generally, yes. Does he bring lunch often? Emily looked at him. Dante's expression remained perfectly serious. Sometimes. Why? Because humans require food. That's not what I meant. I know. Brutus wandered toward the door Noah had just exited through. Dante watched him. Does he bring lunch to all his clients? Emily nearly laughed. I'm not his client. That answer somehow made things worse. She let Dante suffer for another moment, before explaining that Noah was simply a longtime friend and professional acquaintance. She did not mention Noah's mild interest in her. There was no reason to, especially when Dante had absolutely no reason to care. The following afternoon, Dante arrived carrying lunch. Not personally, technically. One of his men carried several elegant boxes from a restaurant Emily recognized as the kind of place where reservations required planning and appetizers cost more than her weekly grocery budget. The boxes covered half the counter. Emily stared. What is this? Lunch. For whom? You. She opened one container, then another. There was enough food for several people. Emily slowly looked at Dante. Is this because Noah brought me a sandwich? No. The answer came immediately. Too immediately. Emily looked down. Brutus was sitting beside the counter, staring at Dante with intense interest. She nodded toward him. Even your dog doesn't believe you. Dante glanced at Brutus. Brutus continued staring. You're projecting human motives onto an animal. I'm really not. Dante calmly removed his jacket and sat down as if billionaires routinely delivered competitive lunches to neighborhood pet shop owners. Emily served him some of the food. He accepted without comment. That should have ended the subject. It didn't. 2 days later, Noah returned carrying 2 coffees. Brutus greeted him enthusiastically. Dante happened to be standing near the counter. His eyes went first to Noah, then to the coffees, then to Brutus. Emily saw the entire calculation. Don't. Dante looked at her. I haven't said anything. You were thinking very loudly. His gaze narrowed. She smiled. It was his own line returned to him, and they both knew it. Noah handed her 1 coffee. Dante said nothing. He didn't need to. Emily was beginning to understand the cracks in his control. Dante Valente could negotiate deals worth hundreds of millions without revealing what he thought. He could command rooms filled with powerful men using little more than a glance. But apparently, one veterinarian with a sandwich and decent coffee presented an entirely different strategic problem. Emily didn't mistake jealousy for love. Not yet. But she recognized what it meant. Dante was no longer simply noticing Brutus's attachment to Happy Tales. He was noticing who came through Emily's door, who made her laugh, who knew how she took her coffee, and increasingly, who occupied the space beside her. The strangest part was that Dante still seemed determined to pretend none of this mattered. Brutus, at least, had been honest from the beginning. He had found somewhere he wanted to be. Dante was taking considerably longer to admit the same thing. The invitation arrived 2 weeks later. An elite animal welfare foundation was hosting its annual charity event, and Happy Tales had been invited as a community partner. Emily almost declined. Events filled with wealthy donors were not exactly her natural environment, but Happy Tales had spent years helping local rescue groups with discounted grooming and basic animal care. The invitation recognized work she was proud of, so she went. Dante was already there. Emily understood immediately why. The Valente name appeared among the foundation's largest corporate supporters. Dante's legitimate businesses had funded rescue programs, shelters, and veterinary initiatives for years. He looked entirely at home among the city's wealthiest people. Emily did not. That didn't bother her nearly as much as some people apparently expected it to. Emily Parker. Victoria Hale approached with an elegant smile. She was polished, wealthy, socially effortless, and connected to several charities supported by Dante's companies. Her eyes briefly moved toward Dante, before returning to Emily. "You're the woman who grooms Dante's dog." Emily smiled politely. "I own Happy Tails. Of course." The correction should have been enough. It wasn't. Later, Victoria introduced her to another donor. "This is Emily. She takes care of Dante's dog." Then again, "The woman who grooms Dante's dog." Each introduction was perfectly pleasant. That was what made it effective. Emily's business disappeared. Her years of work disappeared. The rescue animals, difficult cases, unpaid hours, and community relationships disappeared. She became an accessory to a powerful man. Dante noticed by the third time. Emily knew because his expression changed almost imperceptibly. But he said nothing. Neither did she. Not yet. The moment came during a conversation among several donors and community partners. Someone asked Emily how Happy Tails had become connected to Dante Valente. Before Emily could answer, Victoria smiled. Apparently, the secret to networking is much simpler than we've all made it. A few people looked toward her. Victoria continued lightly. "Win over the dog, and you get access to the billionaire owner." A few polite laughs followed. Not cruel. Almost worse. Emily felt heat rise beneath her skin. She became suddenly aware of how the room might see her. A small business owner beside a billionaire. A woman who had somehow entered Dante Valente's orbit. A convenient story people could simplify however they wanted. Then Emily looked at Victoria. "Brutus entered my shop by accident." The laughter faded. Dante came back by choice. Her voice remained calm. "My business existed before either of them walked through my door. It'll still exist, whether they come back tomorrow or never come back again." That was all. No speech. No plea for approval. Emily turned slightly, intending to end the conversation. Then Dante spoke. Why was she invited? The room became quiet. He wasn't looking at Victoria. He was looking at one of the event organizers. The woman hesitated. "Emily?" "Yes." The organizer glanced toward Emily. "Happy Tails works with several rescue organizations we support. They've provided hundreds of hours of discounted care, particularly for animals that are difficult to place with standard grooming services." Dante's gaze moved briefly to Victoria. Then perhaps introduce her for what she did. Nothing about his voice was threatening. It didn't need to be. The correction was devastating, precisely because it was simple. The organizer recovered quickly. A short time later, when community partners were formally acknowledged, Emily heard her name. Not as Dante's anything. Emily Parker, founder and owner of Happy Tails, and one of our valued community animal care partners. Applause followed. Emily stood among people who now knew exactly why she belonged in that room. Her own work had put her there. Dante had not invented her accomplishments. He had not bought her recognition. He had simply refused to let someone erase them. Later, Emily found him standing away from the crowd. "You didn't have to do that." "But yes, I did. I handled Victoria. I know." There was no hesitation in his answer. Emily studied him. Dante had not stepped in because he thought she was incapable of defending herself. He had waited until she did. Then he had addressed something different. Not the insult. The record. "You could have embarrassed her. I considered it." Emily almost smiled. "You could have threatened someone. I frequently consider that." Dante. A faint trace of amusement appeared in his eyes. "I asked a question. You asked it like someone's future depended on the answer." That's how I ask most questions. She laughed, despite herself. Then his expression became serious. She tried to make your work seem accidental. Emily looked away toward the crowd. It happens. It shouldn't. Something about the simplicity of those words affected her more than a grand defense would have. But the evening had also shown Emily something she could no longer ignore. Dante's world changed the meaning of everything around him. A dog visiting her shop became access. A friendship became strategy. Her standing beside him became a story other people felt entitled to explain. Dante could correct one room. He could not control every room. And Emily had spent too many years building a life that belonged entirely to her to become known merely as the woman standing beside someone more powerful. Across the room, someone called Dante's name. Several people immediately turned toward him. Emily watched the response ripple outward. Power followed him everywhere. For the first time since Brutus had crashed into Happy Tales, she wondered what would happen if that power followed him permanently into her life. She liked Dante. That was no longer the question. The question was whether liking him would eventually cost her the right to be seen as herself. After the charity event, Emily changed. Not dramatically. She was still warm when Dante came into Happy Tales. She still laughed when Brutus attempted to negotiate for treats. She still spoke to Dante with the same irreverence almost nobody else in his life dared use. But a boundary had appeared. Dante noticed it immediately. He simply didn't know how to cross it. A week later, Brutus was asleep behind the counter when Emily finally said what she'd been thinking. He doesn't need to keep coming here. Dante looked up. He's asleep. I mean regularly. His expression became still. Emily nodded toward Brutus. He's doing well. He's calmer. He's getting more unstructured time, more social interaction. Whatever happened that first day isn't happening anymore. Dante understood, so there's no reason to bring him back. No professional reason. The distinction hung between them. Emily could have made it easier. She didn't. For weeks, Dante had always arrived with an explanation. Brutus wouldn't eat. Brutus was restless. Brutus wanted to walk this direction. Brutus needed socialization. Some reasons had been legitimate. Others had become increasingly ridiculous. But there had always been a reason. Emily was removing it. Dante looked at her for several seconds. Understood. That was all. No argument, no attempt to use his influence, no invented emergency involving Brutus's appetite. He called the dog. Brutus stood, walked reluctantly from behind the counter, then looked back at Emily. She scratched beneath his chin. You're fine, big guy. Dante watched them. Then he left. He did not return the next day, or the day after that. A week passed. Then two. Happy Tales returned completely to normal. Emily discovered she hated normal. She missed Brutus sleeping behind the counter like an enormous black rug. Customers carefully stepped around. She missed finding stolen toys beneath his paws. She missed Dante standing where he could see every exit while pretending he was relaxed. She even missed his terrible attempts at casual conversation. And, against her better judgment, she missed watching one of America's most intimidating men become silently offended by Noah carrying lunch. Noah noticed the absence. He was smart enough not to mention it. Emily was grateful. She had wanted distance because she needed to know that her life remained hers. Now she had it. Her business was still hers. Her routines were unchanged. Nobody introduced her in relation to Dante Valente. Nothing had been taken from her. Yet something was missing. Across the city, Dante had a different problem. Brutus was perfectly fine. That was the problem. He ate normally. He exercised. He rested. He was calmer than before. He no longer needed Emily Parker. And without that need, Dante had been forced to confront an uncomfortable truth. For weeks, he had told himself he went to Happy Tales because of his dog. At first, that had been true. Then, Brutus had improved. Dante had kept going. He had stayed while the dog slept. Brought lunch nobody needed. Learned Emily's schedule without intending to. Noticed when she changed her hair. Remembered which stories made her laugh. Become irritated by a veterinarian carrying sandwiches. None of that had anything to do with canine behavior. Brutus had stopped needing an excuse long before Dante had. 3 weeks after his last visit, the bell above the door of Happy Tales rang. Emily looked up automatically. Dante stood there, alone. Her eyes immediately moved behind him. Nothing. Where's your dog? At home. She straightened. Is something wrong? No. Is he eating? Yes. Restless? No. Behavior problems? None. Emily waited. Dante had arrived without Brutus, without a leash, without a behavioral question, without a single plausible reason to be standing in her shop. For once, Dante Valente had no structure to hide behind. Emily folded her arms. Then why are you here? Silence. For a man who controlled billions in assets and commanded people who responded before he finished speaking, the answer appeared strangely difficult. Finally, Dante said it. I wanted to see you. Emily's expression softened. He continued before she could answer. I spent 3 weeks trying to find a more complicated explanation. And? There isn't one. A smile threatened at the corner of her mouth. So this isn't about Brutus. No. You're sure? Because he could suddenly have a very serious problem with breakfast. Dante almost smiled. Emily. She let him suffer for another second. Then she asked, What exactly do you want? Dante understood what she was doing. This time, there would be no dog between them. No professional excuse, no ambiguity. I want to take you to dinner. Emily raised an eyebrow. That sounded suspiciously like a statement. Dante stared at her. She waited. The feared Mafia Boss, who could issue a command and move hundreds of people, apparently realized that none of those rules applied here. His voice changed slightly. Emily Parker, would you have dinner with me? She smiled. Yes. Something in Dante's shoulders eased. Emily noticed. So did he. For the first time, Dante Valente had walked through the door of Happy Tales without Brutus leading him there. He had come with nothing to retrieve, nothing to solve, nothing to command. He had simply come because there was a woman on the other side of that door he wanted to see. And finally, he had learned how to ask. Several months later, the bell above the door of Happy Tales rang. Emily looked up. Dante entered with Brutus beside him. Some things had changed. Dante and Emily were dating now, slowly, carefully, on terms that belonged to both of them. Some things had not changed at all. Happy Tales was still Emily's. Same owner, same community, same business she had built long before Dante Valente entered her life. Dante had never tried to buy it, transform it, or turn it into another piece of his empire. He had learned that loving something did not require owning it. Brutus, however, had learned no such lesson. The moment his leash came off, the enormous Cane Corso walked straight past Dante, crossed the shop, and settled beside Emily. She scratched behind his ears. Dante stared at him. Not even a hesitation. Emily smiled. This is how we met. I remember. You told me to move. You refused. Then your perfectly trained dog refused you too. I remember that part particularly well. The bell rang again. Noah stepped inside, and Brutus immediately stood to greet him. Dante's expression changed.
Emily pointed at him. "Don't start. I've matured." "Of course." Then Dante noticed what Noah was carrying. 2 coffees. His eyes narrowed. "Why does he have 2? Emily burst out laughing. Dante maintained that it was a reasonable question. Brutus, having greeted everyone important to him, returned to Emily and rested his massive head against her leg. Dante watched them. The first time Brutus had chosen Emily, Dante thought something had gone wrong. His perfectly trained protection dog had disobeyed. His control had failed. But nothing had gone wrong. Brutus had simply recognized something before Dante did. A place where he didn't have to be constantly alert. A person around whom he could stop working. Someone who looked beneath discipline, power, and appearances, and understood what was actually there. Emily had never tried to change Brutus. She had simply given him space to be more than what was expected of him. Without realizing it, she had done the same for Dante. At first, Dante returned because his dog needed her. Then he returned because Brutus wanted to be there. Eventually, he began bringing Brutus because the dog had become the perfect excuse for something Dante wasn't ready to admit, until Emily took the excuse away. And Dante finally learned to walk through the door alone. Brutus chose Emily first. Dante simply took longer to understand why.